What's up, Notre Dame fans? Mike Singer from blueandgold.com with Charles Power, On3 Director of Scouting and Rankings. We've had two videos with Charles already. First one, breaking down Notre Dame's two most important recruits on the 2023 board, quarterback Dante Moore and edge Keon Keeley, latter of which is committed to Notre Dame, both five-star players. Video two, we went through the Notre Dame class and things that Charles thinks about the commits going in their senior year. And we gave a close eye on the defensive linemen. So in this third video, it's going to be more of a generic discussion on Notre Dame recruiting and kind of where Charles sees this Notre Dame football program. Make sure you guys hit the thumbs up before we really dive into this video. And Charles, so Notre Dame currently has the number one class according to the 2023 consensus football team recruiting rankings at On3. And I mean, when I was at Rivals and now at On3, I mean, Notre Dame often will jump up and get a lot of commitments early, and then, you know, it just kind of drops. It's just a natural thing when you have a lot of commits early. On3's recruiting rankings tries to offset that, though, by using a rolling scale. So you see on the screen, average number of commits used in this ranking's 5. So this is only taking Notre Dame's top 5 commits into account. This score of 94.152 that's over USC, Georgia, Tennessee, and Bama. So, I mean, do you have any kind of idea or projection of where you think Notre Dame might finish out, considering the guys that they're in the mix for, or just, you know, looking off history?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to pinpoint which teams we think are really gonna like make a run at, you know, the number one, top 5, you know, 1, 2, 3 in the rankings. But I think Notre Dame has a real shot of finishing top 5. I think it's probably unrealistic if you just kind of look at, you know, they have 12 commits. Is probably what, like half a class. I'm not sure how many they're going to take this cycle, but about approximately half a class. The average rating, which I think is probably a good kind of point to go off of at this early stage. The average rankings, 91.76, which is, I mean, like that's phenomenal for 12 commits. Like Notre Dame has more commitments than all these other teams, and like you said, Mike, that's not something that is really weighed in this at all. So, their 12 commits at 91, close to 92 on the average. I think that would pace to be, I would say, almost a for sure top 10 class, if not top 5. It's hard to say if they would probably need to run the table to have a shot at being number one, just historically speaking, based on if you look at the classes that typically rank 1 and 2, they're almost always, you know, Texas A&M was number 1 last year. They signed, I guess, what was the highest rated class on paper since, you know, the internet recruiting era. So it's probably not realistic to expect that to happen every year, but we typically see a couple of those SEC teams, Alabama and Georgia, chief among them, over the last 5-10 years have consistently, you know, signed classes that are, the average rating is like upwards of 93. So that would be kind of how I would handicap it right now. Like I would think number 1, probably unrealistic, but top 5, I think they have a shot at, which, you know, if you're Notre Dame, given how good they are at developing players and, you know, translating the talent they recruit on the field, a top 5 class, I think would be phenomenal for Notre Dame, you know, Marcus Freeman's first full cycle.
Yeah, and currently on the screen, we're looking at the 2022 consensus team rankings, and you do have Notre Dame there at 90.83, and they had the number 6 class last year, which I think was their best finish in this ranking since the I believe it was 2013. You know, that you know, great class for Notre Dame finished number 4, and you look at the average ranking here, 91.76, and let's go to Notre Dame's current class. Average rating right now, 91.76. So it's kind of interesting there. Hey, maybe Notre Dame. My projection right now is 4 to 8. That's where I feel like Notre Dame is. I think on the high, I think they're going to finish number 4. Another thing, Charles, is to, you know, get a top 5 class. You gotta look at who you're knocking out. Like, because I think the way A&M's recruiting, I think they're going to be up there every single year. Alabama and Georgia are mainstays. Tennessee, USC, they're trying to get into that top five. Ohio State, um, LSU, Texas, Clemson, Oregon, all these schools are vying for that top five. So you got to bump some of these teams out. Speaking of some of these other contenders, I mean, you track for my job, I just track Notre Dame recruiting and their targets. I'm not following all the guys going to Bama and A&M quite like you are, Charles. So when you look at Notre Dame recruiting in recent years, specifically maybe these past couple classes, are you able to share kind of how things are stacking up from a Fighting Irish perspective compared to some of these SEC juggernauts?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about Notre Dame's recruiting, at least in like the last couple cycles, I always think back of Brian Kelly's quote at the bowl game where he was kind of saying like we have to like ratchet things up. That's kind of like a little bit of like a you know a kind of a watershed or just kind of like a point of emphasis, like saying, hey, like we made the playoffs, we need to up our game a little bit, and then you have Marcus Freeman coming in as head coach and I think providing a jolt, I guess, on the recruiting trail. He's super active. I mean, I think nowadays in high level college football, you look at the schools that recruit the best, the head coach is the point man, and just the level of involvement that they have with all the all their top targets. I think that's almost a must at this point if you're going to be in that top five range. Because like you said, like these schools are all competing. They're competing for the same top prospects. So like that's really kind of what determines how they shake out in the recruiting rankings is you're landing the 5 stars. How many of those guys are you getting? Because they're basically all going after the same guys. So how your head coach and your assistants are able to close is a big deal. And I think Notre Dame's done a really good job of just the early evals too. I mean, Keon Keeley was not the number 3 player in the country when they jumped on him and took him. Now obviously they have to hold serve and keep him because I'm sure teams are going to continue coming after him. I mean, he's a top 5 prospect in the class, but that I think speaks to Notre Dame's evaluation process as well. So yeah, I mean, I think having Marcus Freeman running point on all these prospects would move things in the right direction. Notre Dame's always had one of the, not always, but I would say the last 5 years has had one of the better rosters in college football, just with how they develop, especially in the lines of scrimmage, defense, and there's certainly some areas that I think they could improve on to take the jump to that kind of top tier. When you're thinking of your perennial playoff teams, but I think they're moving in the right direction. I think if you're a Notre Dame fan, you have to be pleased with the early returns.
And that kind of leads us into the final discussion here is where does Notre Dame need to improve to win a title? I mean, all pundits and fans pretty much agree on the same thing. In Brian Kelly's era at Notre Dame, I mean, for all the winning he did, not no elite quarterbacks. There just was not. If Ian Book was your best quarterback, I mean, he was fantastic, but I mean, he's not Trevor Lawrence or Tua or some of those guys. I mean, you have to have, especially if you're Notre Dame and you don't have the best weapons, you have to have a darn good quarterback, to carry those guys along with you and make them better. I mean, Notre Dame did not have that. And then, yeah, the weapons are not, amazing either. But in the trenches, they've been outstanding. But I mean, would you agree with me there? I mean, we talked about Dante Moore in that first video, Charles. I mean, he's pretty important for the future of Notre Dame.
Yeah, totally. I think quarterback is what you have to start with. Like that's the biggest thing with Notre Dame. As you can win 10 games, you can run the ball and all of that, play smash mouth football, but the margins are very tight when you get into college football playoff level stuff. And you really, I think, to have a non-star at quarterback, you really almost have to kind of be like Georgia last year, where they had a defense that had 7 first rounders on it. I mean, it's just like 7 first rounders in one draft. There's probably gonna be 10 or so that were actually playing, but Yeah, so I think having that quarterback that can even the playing field is clutch. I think one thing too with Dante Moore, if you look at his skill set, he's a guy who I think when he can play clean, he can distribute the ball really well. I mean, he's as one of the better passers in what's a really strong cycle at quarterback. So if you were to just kind of project it out, say he ends up signing with Notre Dame, plays behind one of the best offensive lines in the country, I think that's a good fit for just his skill set. Um, and he's a really good decision maker and all of that. So I think that fit would be what you would, that would be the ideal scenario for Notre Dame projecting it out. But I agree with you too on the skill players. I mean, Notre Dame has had they've had some really good receivers in the past couple of years. You think about Will Fuller, Chase Claypool, but when you look at the landscape of college football now in these top teams, receiver is really kind of like the new almost like defensive line in that like these top programs are stacking so much talent at receiver and they're putting four of these receivers on the field at the same time to where you can't like it creates a one-on-one matchup to where you can't guard them. Like think about the Alabama teams when Tua was the quarterback or LSU with Joe Burrow. They're going up to the line of scrimmage and saying, okay, this is a favorable matchup we have. We have Jerry Jeudy in the slot or we have Justin Jefferson in the slot. He's got a safety on him. It's one step throw, slant, touchdown, and that's kind of the where they're trending. It's almost kind of like think about like in like the '80s when these teams would have like be running wishbone and they have 3 5-star running backs in the backfield, and you kind of had kind of a pick your poison thing. That's really how receiver recruiting is now. So I think having that quarterback, and then if you in landing like electric playmakers that can really stress defenses, particularly at receiver. Or a running back in space kind of thing. I think those are the two areas where I would say Notre Dame has the biggest gap to close with your perennial top programs.
Good insight here from On3 Director of Scouting and Rankings over at On3. Appreciate you guys for watching. Make sure you hit the thumbs up. Head to blueandgold.com. Get all of our premium recruiting insights and analysis. Every time there's a new commitment, Charles Power delivers his expert reaction and film breakdown of that player. So make sure to check that out. Hey, maybe we've got some new commitments coming up soon that Charles will give his insight on. So again, make sure you guys check that out at blueandgold.com, and we'll catch you next time.